Welcome to day 2 of Spirit Week. I'm glad you decided to join me on today's daily walk. So today's story is one that you've probably heard a few hundred times. It's kind of like that building you drive by every day that you don't really notice the details in anymore, like how pretty the flowers are out front or what color the front door is painted. You see it all the time, so you assume that you know everything about it without actually taking a close look. So today I want us to take a closer look at the story of the Good Samaritan, found in Luke 10, starting in verse 25. It says this: On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." The story comes out of a conversation Jesus is having with an expert in the law. He asked Jesus how to get eternal life, and Jesus turns the question around and asks him how the law would answer. And the lawyer already knows it. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the heart of the law. That's the Reader's Digest version. Up until this point, the lawyer and Jesus, they seem to be on the same page. Then the lawyer looks for a loophole. It's a trick I've used before. I'm sure you have too. Jesus tells a story to answer this loophole question of who is my neighbor. We've heard this story many times before. We know it well. There's a man who's robbed and left for dead. We know a priest and a Levite both walk by and do nothing. Then the hero of the story shows up. But this isn't just any hero. It's a Samaritan, an outcast, seen as an enemy of Israel. I picture Jesus telling this story to the lawyer and those gathered around him, and it wouldn't surprise me if when he reveals the hero, there's not a gasp from the crowd. I mean, this is a strange part of the story. We don't normally see our enemies as heroes in the stories that we tell. Isn't that just like Jesus? Taking the social barriers and turning them upside down, looking into the hearts of people to understand who they really are, instead of just relying on their labels. Jesus has a way of reminding us that the people that we see as others are really more like us than we want to admit sometimes, and that we need them in our lives. The Samaritan in this story goes above and beyond to help this stranger on the road. He cleaned and bandaged the stranger's wounds, placed the stranger on his own donkey, took him to an inn where he spent the night taking care of him, and then paid the innkeeper to take care of the stranger with the promise of coming back and paying off any debt that the man may collect. When I go over all these actions of the Samaritan, it amazes me that he was willing to do this for a stranger. The man literally knew nothing about each other, yet the Samaritan goes above and beyond to help. He was even willing to sacrifice his own comfort, giving up his own donkey, giving up his own time to spend the night, giving up his own money to pay for the debts of the sinner to make sure he had a safe place to heal. I don't know what action the innkeeper takes when the Samaritan leaves the stranger there. I like to assume that he honors the wish of the Samaritan and the stranger by allowing him to stay there and to heal. I think he did it. Because you see, kindness has a way of being contagious. When we see the kindness of others, it has a way of opening up our own hearts and calling us to follow that lead. I think that one reason Jesus tells this story to the lawyer and those who are listening that day is because he wants them to know that they are called to take care of each other. They are called to take care of the people they see as outcasts, even those they see as enemies. I think the lesson goes even further, and it calls us to be willing to sacrifice for each other. I remember as a kid watching my mom cook dinner and fix the plates every night. You see, my dad always got the biggest piece of meat, and I got the second, and my mom always gave herself the smallest. It wasn't because I needed more meat than her. I was a child. I didn't always clean my plate. She did it because she loved me and my father. She loved us and was willing to sacrifice for us. I often think about the little ways that she showed us her love, like sacrificing the biggest piece of meat. It's one thing to sacrifice for our families. It's a whole other thing to sacrifice for strangers or even our enemies. But that's the call we have as Christians. We're called to love God with everything we have and to love each other as ourselves. Tonight we'll gather on Zoom for a virtual mission trip. We'll talk to Kim and Mark Wyatt. They're CBF field personnel in the Research Triangle area of North Carolina. They work with refugees, welcoming them into the community. We'll hear about their work. We'll be able to ask them questions. And I want to challenge us as a congregation to work together by combining our money to help in the work of welcoming these families into our state. I want to invite you to make a donation to our church, and all that money will go to help furnish an apartment for a refugee family. It only costs about $700 to furnish an apartment. And I think that it would be something really great for our congregation to say at the end of the week, we furnished an apartment for a family who's moving to our state. So let's be good Samaritans and let's share what we have with these families. Yesterday, our reflection question was, how can you be more open to welcoming God in your own life? Today's question is very similar, but together they get at the heart of the law and the heart of our calling as Christians. Today's question is, how can you be more open to loving others in your own life? How can you be more open to loving others in your own life? So spend some time thinking about that today as you live out your faith and you do this journey of life. I'll see you tomorrow.